talking about downtown, Toontown.
Hello everybody, welcome to Downtown Toontown, the podcast dedicated to all things Toontown, Roger Rabbit, and Disney and animation in general. I'm your host Justin, and this is episode number 5. I have another exciting interview lined up for today's show. But before I get to that, I want to just recap some of my adventures that I've had since episode 4. I've been to Disneyland pretty recently. I got to go to Toontown, or at least as close as I could possibly get by the construction wall. I even got to ride on the Disneyland Railroad while I got to see a little sneak peek of the construction they're working on, but that's about as far as I went. I've also taken photos of every piece of Roger Rabbit merchandise that they sell at the parks. If you're interested in seeing all the Roger Rabbit merchandise available at the Disneyland Resort, please follow our show page at downtown_Toontown on Instagram, and follow us on Twitter at DowntownToonPod. All of your likes and follows will help out the show and increases the likelihood of me continuing. You can even follow us on Facebook and MySpace. I'm just kidding about that last part. We're not going to be on MySpace. We're not on MySpace. But yes, Downtown Toontown does have a Facebook page. So if you want to go ahead and follow us and like us, you can do that too, by all means. All the attention the show gets helps. So please help follow and subscribe to us everywhere you can. It helps us in the algorithm. I also got to see our favorite movie, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, on the big screen at the Frida Cinema in Santa Ana, California. The Frida Cinema is always a fun place to visit. I wish more people were there at my screening. I tell you this not to brag, although it was great to see Roger Rabbit, let alone on the big screen. But I'm telling you this, listeners, to say, if you find Who Framed Roger Rabbit playing in theaters, if you have a local nonprofit or art house theater playing this movie, please notify me. I'm California based, as you can probably tell, but there are a ton of theaters across this country and some abroad internationally, and they could all use support right now. The East Coast in particular is more often off my radar. I know our beloved Gary Wolf resides in Boston, so please forward any theater info regarding if they're showing Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and I'll happily share it on this show and spread the word. With that out of the way, I would like to jump to today's news.
Jeepers, another stupid newsreel. I hate the news.
The Red Card Trolley opened back up at Disney California Adventure on July 17th, 2022. The attraction, based on the beloved and historic Pacific Electric Railway's Red Car, featured heavily in the plot of the 1988 classic Who Framed Roger Rabbit, was closed in 2019 to make way for Avengers Campus, and remained closed all throughout the pandemic, left many speculating whether it would ever come back at all. Well, it finally came back, and it's back up running as good as ever. If you're interested in seeing video of the Red Car Trolley in action, you can see it on my YouTube video, Red Car Trolley at Disney California Adventure, posted on my YouTube page, JJ Smith Media. So hop along and ride along with us virtually. In other news on Light and Magic, Disney Plus's newest docuseries is about the origin and creation of the special effects production house Industrial Light and Magic, founded by George Lucas. It premiered last month on July 2022, and while it's a fantastic series, much of the series focuses on Star Wars, which makes sense because that is the origin of the company and all. Still, Roger Rabbit is featured and mentioned on the show. 3 times to be exact. But as one of Industrial Light and Magic's great accomplishments, it would have been cool to see Roger Rabbit discussed more. But I guess that's what the documentaries on the DVDs and Blu-rays are for. Thankfully, there's plenty of great new interviews from George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and many of the often overlooked heroes of special effects, ranging from Dennis Muren to Phil Tippett to Richard Edlund to Ken Walston. You can even hear cool stories like how Joe Johnson made the leap from visual effects artist to film director. So if you have Disney Plus, put Light and Magic on your watch list today. And that will wrap up today's news. Today's guest has seemingly done it all. He is a respected author, having done 11 books on Disney. He's worked on movies going back 40 years now, going all the way to The Black Cauldron in 1985, leading all the way through the Disney Renaissance. He's worked on all the films we've grown up on, including Who Framed Roger Rabbit. He's worked on special effects, he's done directing, he's done interviews on documentaries, he's even worked on film restorations on the classics that Walt Disney himself made. He's even in my industry, podcasting. You could hear him on his show, which has way more listeners and subscribers than I could ever dream of, the Skull Rock Podcast. But you can also listen to him right now on my show. Please welcome the jack of all trades for Disney, Mr. Dave Bossert.
So Dave Bossert, are you there? Welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks, Justin. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining. I know you primarily as a book author. I actually have a number of your books. I have 4 of your books, actually.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, you are quite the prolific Disney author. If you actually go into your career, you're actually a filmmaker. You have a film background going back, from what I see, about 40 years. So if my first question to you is, if you don't mind, could you tell us maybe about your film background? How did you get into film?
Sure. I actually majored in animation at California Institute of the Arts in Southern California, in Valencia, California. And once I graduated from the Cal Arts Film School with a major in character animation, I wound up working at Don Bluth Studios for about 9 months, and then I was hired by Disney. And I spent a little more than 32 years at Disney working on films like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Black Cauldron, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, The Nightmare Before Christmas, Pocahontas, Hercules, Hunchback, Fantasia 2000, and a whole bunch of other films. And then from there, I rolled into and helped form a special projects group, and ultimately was the creative director and became head of the special projects group before I left. And I kind of transitioned out of Walt Disney Animation Studios because I started writing a few years before that. I had my first book published in 2013, and then I had some books published in 2015, and then I exited the studio in 2016 and started writing full time. I don't like to use the word retired.
Yeah, well, was Disney always the goal? Was that like where you always wanted to end up working?
No, it really wasn't. In fact, it was funny. When I graduated high school, I went to State University of New York at Farmingdale in New York, state of New York. And I took a advertising art program, and that's where I did a TV graphics class and started creating some animation with my artwork. And that led me to Cal Arts. But my goal was always to go back to New York and get into the commercial end of things. and do animated commercials and advertising and all of that. And I wound up doing several hundred commercials, but all freelance out here in Los Angeles while I was working at Disney. But it just seemed like, a job was offered to me to work at Don Bluth Studios, and I worked on some early video games, Dragon's Lair and Space Ace. And I thought, well, I'll just do that. When that's finished, I'll go back to New York. And then Disney offered me a job to come on to the Black Cauldron to help get that finished. So I said, no, let me go do that. And I'll once I finish that project, I'll go back to New York. And then they put me on the next film and the next film. And it just, before I knew it, 5 years had gone by. And I realized I wasn't going back to New York because they wanted to keep me at Disney. And, I just continued working. And I ultimately wound up doing a lot of Tony the Tiger and Fruit Loops and Rice Krispies and Toucan Sam and, all the Keebler elves and all these kinds of commercials throughout the 1990s and into the early 2000s.
Yeah, and to clarify, you were into visual effects?
Yeah, so I got hired into the special effects department at Disney, and so I entered Disney as like an entry level position as an in-betweener in the special effects department, and then I quickly rose up to a special effects animator, and then a supervising animator, and then eventually became a visual effects supervisor.
All right. Well, since the name of the show is Downtown Toontown, I guess I have to go right into when did you get to work on Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
So it was kind of interesting. I was working at Disney. I think I was working on The Rescuers Down. No, I'm sorry. I was working on Oliver and Company. And one of the producers at Don Bluth Studios kept coming to me and asking if I'd come over and work on some pictures that they were going to do in Dublin, Ireland. And so, I kept saying no. And every time he came back, the deal was sweetened a little bit more. And I think the third or fourth time they asked me to join them, I wound up saying, okay. And so I left Disney for about 9 months, and I went to Ireland and worked on The Land Before Time. And while I was working on The Land Before Time, they were setting up Who Framed Roger Rabbit animation production in London. And so I knew one of the producers from Disney, Don Hahn. And so Don and I started communicating, and I went to London and met up with him, and and ultimately finished my job on The Land Before Time, and then moved from Dublin to London to do Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So that would have been 1987 into 1988.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you got to hear about your stories. You worked with Don Bluth, because there's a whole interesting, story about, him being a Disney animator turning into a Disney rival. I think at one point I remember hearing like Spielberg actually wanted to use Don Bluth to actually work on Roger Rabbit. Did you ever hear any rumblings about sort of that studio?
I never heard that before, but it's possible that in the early plannings of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, they may have been thinking, Spielberg may have made that suggestion, but ultimately, when they hired Richard Williams to direct the animation on the, he wanted to do it in London, and then he was clearly plugged in with a lot of people in the animation community, not just in London, but also in Canada and other parts of the world. And I think when I look back on Who Framed Roger Rabbit, I think one of my fondest memories is the fact that there was such an international crew of people. You know, there were animators from Canada and England and the United States and Spain and Germany and Denmark and just all over the world. There were people from Brazil and it was just a really it was a melting pot of artists from all over the place.
Do you remember any specific scenes that you worked on? Any moments?
I did a lot with some of the visual effects of Jessica in the ink and paint club. On stage, I did a lot of that. I really worked on a tremendous amount of stuff throughout the entire movie, but that's some of the stuff that jumps to mind.
And you do mention, being fond looking back on like the actual making of the movie and the community. What about the film itself? Like, when you look back on it, is it a highlight of your career? Was it just another job that you had to do, or like how does Who Framed Roger Rabbit rank?
It's funny. Oftentimes I get asked, by people, what was my favorite movie, and it's so difficult to answer that kind of a question because it's really like asking somebody who their favorite child is. Right. You can't pick just one, but I always say that Who Framed Roger Rabbit kind of bubbles to the surface as having a lot of fond memories because it was such an international crew, and the fact that I got to live in London for a while, and traveled in Europe and things like that. So, there's a lot of fond memories from that period. And when you're working on a film like that, you don't know off the top of your head if it's going to be a massive hit or it's going to be some flop, but all I could say was there was a lot of excitement because we were taking the live action and animation combination technique to a new level with a feature film. And I got to see a screening of it a number of years ago for the 25th anniversary, and that movie holds up really well. Even to this day, considering it was pre-computer days. All the animated cells were hand painted. Everything was shot on down shooter cameras, and all the compositing was done on optical printers. So it was really a very analog movie compared to if you were to do that kind of a film today. It would be all digital. You'd be doing digital compositing and digital ink and paint and all of that kind of stuff.
Besides your career in visual effects, how much longer did you do it after you finished Roger Rabbit? When did you leave again?
Well, my last picture at Walt Disney Animation Studios was Fantasia 2000, and from that point, I transitioned into doing a special projects group where I was working on projects all across the Walt Disney Company. A lot of stuff with the theme parks, theme park attractions, publishing, gaming, commercials, TV shows, website animation. I mean, you name it. It was, we did stuff for Dancing with the Stars when they did their Disney episode. So
yeah.
So it was a lot of variety. So my last animated feature really would have been Fantasia 2000, where I actually had hands-on with it. I have screen credits on a bunch of other films like Big Hero 6 and Frozen and stuff like that as being special projects where I did some support stuff for marketing and things like that. But I didn't actually work on those movies.
Interesting. So on your IMDb, one of your jobs, it was a director. You mentioned your last film being Fantasia 2000.
Yeah.
Your first directing as a job was, I believe, the short One by One, which was supposed to be in the infamous Fantasia 3, which ended up never actually getting made. Do you have any fond memories of working on maybe a film that didn't quite
Yeah,
become?
I mean, clearly after we finished Fantasia 2000, I mean, Roy Disney definitely wanted to do another one. It was going to be sort of a Fantasia world where it was going to use world music pieces with animation, segments. And we did The Little Match Girl, which was to a Russian piece. We did Lorenzo the Cat, which was to an Argentinian tango piece of music. There was a couple.
Destino?
Well, Destino was sort of a standalone piece that I think people were thinking they might want to put into a Fantasia world. And it would have broken one of the rules because it would have been the only segment with lyrics because
Yeah.
there's a song to it. But, again, Fantasia was about breaking rules and about doing things different. And so, yeah, that was being considered. I had pitched an Aboriginal piece that was based on an Aboriginal folk tale. I would have used Australian Aboriginal music like didgeridoos and things like that. And there was a Japanese piece, there was an Indian piece. So, there was definitely a number of pieces there. But the reason why I wound up getting a directing credit on One by One was the film really was Pichot Hunt, the director. He was doing that piece and wound up leaving the company before it was finished. So they kind of looked to me to finish the piece. And so I finished it and they gave me a directing credit, which was very nice of them.
Yeah, it's cool that, you're sort of their go-to guy with, like, if they just need some, job that needs to be fixed real quick.
I mean, honestly, my career was one where, I used to tell people I did everything from janitorial to executive produce.
Yeah, you're Disney's handyman.
And so, I did clean up some messes and jump in on projects that were, had gone off the rails and help finish things. And that was what it was always about. It was about, working on projects and to their completion so that people could enjoy them, good, bad, or indifferent. You wanted people to see the work and enjoy it.
Now, I actually first really got to know you or know who you were, because I was a geeky teenager and I loved the DVD bonus features. And you actually got to work on film restoration. You got to help restore the classics of Walt Disney. You gave an interview about, helping restore Bambi.
Bambi and some of our other classic films, the actual original nitrate negatives are being stored at the Library of Congress film vaults. Those films were shot on successive exposure film, and so there's 3 color records for every frame. So each one of those color records is scanned. So we're able to go in there and clean up this movie so it's absolutely pristine and still retain the artistic integrity of the movie.
Party.
I think you worked on Cinderella, Lady and the Tramp. So how does one go into film restoration?
Well, really it's, when you're doing a restoration on a classic film like, Snow White, Pinocchio, Bambi, any of those films, it's not one person doing it. It's a team of people, and the team is made up of folks that are specialists in certain disciplines. And so I was really sort of the artistic supervisor, if you will, on that team. And we would sit in a screening room and we'd go through these films, literally frame by frame, and call out notes on what needed to be fixed and cleaned up and things like that. And there certainly were philosophical discussions about mistakes that were made in some of those early films and whether they should be fixed or not fixed. And I remember in one particular instance when we were in the middle of doing Bambi, the restoration on Bambi.
Let me guess.
Yeah.
Was it the disappearing raccoon?
Yeah, it's the disappearing raccoons. And they don't really disappear. If you actually look at it carefully, they jump from the mouth of the mother raccoon over to the left side of the screen. And what had happened was the camera operator put the cell down on the wrong set of pegs.
Mm.
And so, it was clearly a mistake, and it was a mistake that they couldn't afford to go back and fix when they were making the movie because of time constraints, budget constraints, those kinds of things. And so there was a camp that felt like it should be left the way it is because it was a known thing, and it should be just left because that's the way they made it. And then there was folks like myself who felt like, well, it was a mistake, it really should be fixed. I mean, when you're doing restoration on those early films, they were doing cells against backgrounds under a camera. And so when you look at those negatives closely, you're going to see there was dust, there was dirt, there was Newton rings, there was cell ripples, there was cell flashes. There were all kinds of things that were photographed into the film that were not the artistic intent of the movie. They were not, the filmmaker said, oh, I want to make sure we have dust in the scene. It was just a byproduct of the process and the technology they were working with. So if you're going to go in and do a restoration, you have to look at it from the standpoint of what was the artistic intent? What did they want? They wanted to put clean cells down on a background in the correct order on the correct set of pegs. And that's, to me, was the guiding principle. So if there was a scene that had, for instance, these baby raccoons popping out of the mother's mouth, that was clearly a mistake. The tiebreaker on that particular decision was Roy Disney. Roy E. Disney was the guy I went and talked to, and I explained the situation. And he looked at me, he said, Dave, it was a mistake, wasn't it? I said, yes, it was a mistake. He said, well, we should fix it, and that was the end of it. He felt it should have been fixed, and that's why we fixed it.
Yeah, that's great that Roy Disney was the tiebreaker.
Yeah.
I do, one of the things that was cool when I read interviews of when you restored those films was that, you got to meet up with, some of the animators who were still alive at the time. I think Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson. I believe you mentioned you worked with Tyrus Wong, I think, who got to work on Bambi.
Yeah.
I mean, I know they were all getting up there at the time, but do you have any memories meeting them and like giving you any insight?
Yeah, I mean, look, we wherever possible, we always wanted to get filmmakers, surviving filmmakers that were still around to come in and see what we were doing. And I remember vividly we screened Lady and the Tramp for Ollie John. I think it was either Ollie John. I think it was Ollie Johnson that we screened it for. And he was in his early 90s at that point, I think. And when the screening was over, he was somewhat emotional. He said that's the way the film should have looked. And so it's very gratifying when you hear from the filmmakers themselves that you've done something, you've done a restoration on a movie that they worked on, and they're looking at it and saying, my God, that's how we always wanted it to be. But they were limited by the technology. And by the way, I use the analogy that, if you go into a museum that has a painting that's, say a painting by, Leonardo da Vinci or Raphael, and it's several hundred years old, and there's layers and layers of dirt on that canvas, would you say, well, we have to leave it that way? Or do you have a restoration person go in and painstakingly remove that layer of dirt off the canvas? And I sit there and say, the artist would want people to view his painting the way he had painted it. The moment he finished it, the last brushstroke, the vividness of the colors, not with 300 years worth of soot and dirt and stuff that accumulates on the surface of a painting. So that's really how you have to view these things. And there's a great painting restorer that has that does a YouTube thing on what he does, and he shows you this painstaking process he goes through to restore a painting. And then at the end of that, each episode, he does sort of a wipe between how the painting looked when he got it and how it looks now, and it's mind blowing on some of them, because it's so you can see the vividness of the colors and all of that kind of stuff. And I think that the restorations we've done on the Disney animated classics are a similar way, because we're removing things that are a distraction to the viewer. Dust and hair and little flashes and paint crawl and things like that pull you out of the movie, because when it's happening, you're like, "Whoa, what's that?" As opposed to being completely focused on the film. So that, I'm very proud of being part of that team of people that did all those restorations.
Yeah, you should be. They look, they'll be enjoyed by millions of people for years to come, hopefully.
Exactly.
You've had, quite the impressive career. Going back to your, I guess, quote, directing, one thing that I thought was really cool was that because some of my earliest memories were during the whole Lion King craze, the whole,
sure,
from the early 90s. You can probably guess the age. So, and you got to direct Timon and Pumbaa's Safety Smart video.
Safety Smart, no doubt about it. Safety Smart, can't do without it. It's really so important that you almost have to shout it. You gotta get Safety Smart. Oh yeah! You gotta get Safety Smart. That means you. You gotta get safety. Gotta get safety. Gotta get safety smart.
What was it like to direct that?
Again, I was very passionate about that project. We did 8 safety films in conjunction with the Underwriters Laboratories. And again, we were tackling subjects where, we felt like, we were actually going to save a life, like water safety or fire safety. And these are films that were dubbed in 34 languages. They've been shown all over the world. Literally hundreds of millions of children, mostly, and certainly adults, teachers and whatnot, have seen these films. And we really wanted to do top quality, which is what Disney's always known for. And so we were able to put as much into the animation as we could, partially by saving on having to do backgrounds from scratch. We actually wound up using a lot of the backgrounds from the Lion King feature film. On that, and because we didn't have to create those because it was existing art, we could use the money we would have spent creating them, we put towards doing better animation than the budget really would have called for. And so it was really, I felt that those were really fun, a lot of fun on those projects. We got to screen some of the titles in to the education minister in Vietnam, in Singapore, in Indonesia, in the United Arab Emirates, and so they were hugely successful, and they're still playing actually on resort channels at the park resorts.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's right. That's cool.
Yeah.
Because like I know that the Timon and Pumbaa stills are often on like the buses, the shuttles there.
Yeah.
So the videos they're shown on TV?
Yeah,
in the
in the
hotels.
hotel rooms, in the Disney hotels on property. I know they have been at least down at Walt Disney World, so I haven't heard from anybody. Maybe one of your listeners will let us know if they've seen them in Paris or Tokyo.
Yeah, let us know. For your listeners out there. So, do you get fan letters? Do you get any reactions that are like surprising to you? Because you've worked on a lot of projects, that people have grown up with.
Um, I'm always getting emails and people reaching out to me asking questions and things like that, and I try to answer as many as possible. With the social media and having a website and things like that, it makes it easier for people to reach out directly and ask questions, and most people are very respectful of my time. And when they do ask a question, I'm always happy to answer it.
I mentioned earlier in the show you've worked on a lot of books. I've owned 4 of them. Is the main one you're promoting? Is it still the Claude Coates book?
Well, right now the Claude Coates book and the Art of George Scribner, the Panama Canal paintings, those are the 2 books that my most recent books. Claude Coates came out last November, and the Art of George Scribner, the Panama Canal paintings, that came out in April. And so right now I'm actually working on a new book, The House of the Future, Walt Disney, MIT, and Monsanto's Vision of Tomorrow.
Oh, that sounds like awesome. I'm
Yeah,
always
so that's going to be fun. And I had written a book on the making of The Nightmare Before Christmas, and I had done it for the 25th anniversary, and through a lot of scheduling and pandemic and all kinds of stuff, it looks like it's actually going to come out for the 30th anniversary, which is next year.
Yeah, that's great because I remember, I follow you on social media. I remember you posted about like you met with Henry Selick.
Yeah, no,
So
I spent a good part of a day with Henry up in the Bay Area. I spent time with Danny Elfman and Tim Burton, of course, and a lot of the artists from various disciplines, most of the animators, art directors, story people, did interviews with all of those folks, and sort of crafted a book that's really a peek behind the curtain, so to speak, of how The Nightmare Before Christmas got made and what goes into doing a stop motion film like that.
yeah, I mean that's the other great Touchstone animated film. Now it's Disney because it was hugely profitable, but it got rebranded. It's such a fascinating film. I love that one too. So you actually worked on that one. So
Yeah,
what? Yeah,
yeah, it was kind of funny when the publishing group asked if I wanted to write that book. I said sure. I worked on the movie, and they had no idea I had worked on the movie. I mean, I did a little bit. I didn't do a lot, but
yeah.
I helped make it snow in Halloween Town, which was something they were having some difficulty doing on figuring out how to do it right, and so I was able to help with that. And I just think that movie, again, I feel very fortunate to have been a little part of working on that film, because it was just a beautifully crafted stop motion movie, and it really, when they did that movie in 93, the studio didn't, they thought it would be too scary for the Disney brand, and they thought they'd alienate people under the Disney banner, and they put it out under Touchstone, but the movie has taken on a life of its own. It's screened annually in theaters, and there's new merchandise every year, and they dress up the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland in a Nightmare Before Christmas theme. So it's become so mainstream that they have stripped the Touchstone off of it, and now it's Disney.
Yeah, and I think it's great that I can't wait for the book. I'm certainly not the last person who would ever make suggestions or ideas or tell anybody what to do. But would you ever consider writing a Who Framed Roger Rabbit book?
Well, actually, there's a guy up in Canada who's written one.
Oh,
That really. So he interviewed most of the artists, but it doesn't have any pictures in it. That's the problem. Uh,
what's it called? Just out of
um,
curiosity.
Gosh, I have a copy of it someplace, and I couldn't tell you off the top. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact title, and my friend will kill me because of that. It's Hold on a second. I'm gonna find it here really quickly.
Yeah, I apologize if I'm putting you on the spot and disappointing your friend.
No, no.
I'll edit this part out, so you'll just, when you find the title, it'll just cut you saying,
Yeah, you know what? It's I gosh. I'm trying to find it here. Yeah, I can't find it.
The Making of Roger Rabbit, pulling a rabbit out of the hat.
That's it. That's the book. Yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
All right,
I
so
was
let me just say, so there's a really good book that came out. It's called well, you know what it is. It's pulling a rabbit out of the hat, the making of Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
So is that the key to making a good book, you think, is you have to have a lot of good pictures?
I'm sorry, but how can one possibly pay attention to a book with no pictures in it?
Because you do
Well,
have some great pictures in your
yeah,
book.
for me, when I do a book, I want to have a balance of text and photos because I find that people do want to see things, and I'm an artist, I'm a filmmaker, and so I want to have visuals accompanying the text.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess, since we're talking about books, I also really like the Oswald book that you did. So you have any good memories of compiling the Oswald book?
Well, the Oswald book was just kind of a fluke because it really all started with the fact that somebody found a lost Oswald cartoon in England. It was going up for auction. I just happened to make the comment to the powers that be that maybe we should buy that print because we didn't have it. And somebody said, okay, we'll allocate money for you. And then I went and helped purchase that print at the auction. And then, that led me to think, well, there's probably other lost cartoons out there, so they gave me a small budget to start looking for other cartoons. And I brought on an outside consultant, David Gerstein, to help with that. And we wound up finding a bunch more, which is really nice. And at some point, hopefully, they'll reissue the collection with all of the lost cartoons we found. But that, going through that whole process then spawned the idea to do a book. And so that's, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, the search for the lost Disney cartoons. That's how that came about. And it's the only book on Oswald.
Yeah, and it's a really informative book. Did you ever did you have to work with the other studio, Universal, because of course they infamously own Oswald all those decades, and some of them they made. There's quite a few shorts that that Disney did not make that Universal made. So
Right. Yeah, I mean, they were very cooperative. Anything that they actually owned, we got permission to use. But yeah, it was a fun process, and I like working on book projects that haven't nobody's done anything on. That to me is kind of fun. So
you've done again many books. Like, where can people order these books and maybe find a little bit more about you?
So
wanna try to give
yeah,
you-
they can go to davidbossert.com, davidbossert.com, and there's a tab that has my books. You can see all the books. You can click on each one of the books, and it'll take you to a book page that you can read about it. There's a lot of articles on my website under the articles tab, so you can find out everything you need to know about me and all my books at davidbossert.com. You can also order any of the books through my website. If people want to order a book, there's some tabs there. They could click on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, and they can order the book.
Yeah, and as of this recording, it's August of 2022. I know, I hope to get it around this week. There is that D23 Expo around the corner. Will you be there signing books?
No, I'm not going to be there this year. I actually had booked a trip in September before I knew what the dates of the D23 were, and I just I had everything in place. So when it came out that it was smack dab in the middle of this 2-week vacation, I was like, oh well, I won't be at this D23.
Okay, so yeah, listeners, don't go to D23 expecting Dave Bossert, but you can buy his books online.
Yeah, and the one thing I would say though is on October 23rd, I'll be at the Disneyana fan club show at the Hilton Doubletree Hotel in Anaheim. It's Sunday, October 23rd, and I'll be signing books there.
That sounds great. Mark your calendars, everybody. I guess, we're, starting to wrap things up. I mean, do you have any last word? Like, looking back at your career, what do you make of it?
Listen, it's been an amazing adventure so far, and it keeps going. I'm having a ball, and you just you work on these projects, you go from one to the next, and you don't realize until 20-30 years later that they've taken on these a life of their own, and they have big fan followings and things like that. So it's very gratifying. I'm thrilled by it, but I'm always looking forward to what the next project is and the next book I'm working on and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm just having a lot of fun, and I'm so glad that there's a lot of folks out there that are enjoying the books I'm writing, and continue to enjoy the films that I had a small part of being being part of, with the hundreds of other colleagues that I work with at the studio during those years.
Yeah, well, keep writing them. Dave, thank you so much for appearing on the show.
Thank you very much, Justin. I really appreciate you having me on. Wishing all of your listeners a great rest of the summer and great rest of the year.
Thanks a lot. You too.
Thank you.
Really happy with that interview. Dave Bossert manages to cover a lot of ground in just 40 minutes. And that should wrap up today's show. I hope to eventually create another episode pretty soon. I'll keep posting pics on all the Downtown Toontown pages on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. So if you need your Downtown Toontown fix before I create a new episode, please follow all that social media. But in the meantime, I'll see you downtown.
Downtown Toontown is an unofficial podcast. It is in no way affiliated with the Walt Disney Company. The opinions expressed on this podcast are mine and mine alone and do not reflect any official member of the Walt Disney Company or the Walt Disney Company itself.